We all know that the debt ceiling crisis is the talk of the town. Everyone's saying how bad it's going to be if it fails and all the problems that are coming with it. Which seems like every single few years there's the debt ceiling crisis because spending is just out of control. And it's no secret that the government's racked up quite the hefty debt of over $30 trillion. And you might think, what would you do if you racked up so much debt, had a debt ceiling, and continuously hit it? Maybe be a little responsible, cut back on some spending, maybe make sure that you're not just overspending every single year into oblivion. But no, those answers don't make any sense in this situation. The real answer is to mint $1 trillion coin, because that makes so much sense to mint a coin and just call it $1 trillion. If you want to see that money is literally worthless, there's no such thing as money. It's just something we all agree has value to make trading for things easier. Look no further than $1 trillion coin. That's the same size as a quarter, but the only difference is instead of having 25 cents printed on it, there's a trillion. But that is exactly what the plan is so far for this. And it's not a new plan. This has been something that's talked about every single time that this debt ceiling thing comes up, because it's just super easy to do. Instead of actually being responsible, just make up a coin worth $1 trillion, solve everyone's problems. Literally the reason that they're doing this here, $1 trillion platinum coin could save the US from economic catastrophe. In less than a month, it would be fast, legal, and no bigger than a regular coin. The headline literally reads the exact same. You look at this and say, what makes this $1 trillion coin? Because they said so. There's nothing there. This doesn't actually have $1 trillion worth of platinum in it. It's literally only $1 trillion because someone said so, which deteriorates the dollar even more and money in general, because what's the point in taxing people if you can just create money out of thin air? Just don't tax anyone, create the money out of thin air, right? Then what do you need taxes for? That's like the normal argument for everything, but the $1 trillion coin never disappoints. And this is constantly a topic of discussion because the debt ceiling, even though it's a debt ceiling, really it's worthless, right? Because here's the debt ceiling. You hit it in a couple years, and then what do? Raise the debt ceiling. Then you hit it in a couple years, and then you raise the debt ceiling. It's literally something that comes up every few years. Every single time it's the biggest deal known to man. Every single time it's world ending. Every single time it's just the biggest problem in the world, and then somehow it gets done near the end. We'll probably see the exact same thing play out like that. But the coin solution was also offered a few years ago when the debt ceiling problem came around. And literally saying here, like, wouldn't need to be bigger than an average coin, can be made quickly, and as a potential debt ceiling loophole. It just doesn't make sense, right? What's the point, right? $1 trillion coin, you would literally devalue or show everyone that money doesn't exist. Because even right now, there's a lot of people that still think the dollar's backed by gold. There's people that think the dollar is like the greatest money in the world, which it could be because everyone believes in it. But if you do things like this, how fast would people be to stop believing in it? If you make $1 trillion coin, like that's insane. A coin that looks like a quarter that's worth $1 trillion, like the money literally doesn't exist then. But there's still problems with it. You can see the Fed is not required to accept it. There's no requirement on part of the Fed. And also there is a large chance that the courts would shoot it down, a large chance that the Treasury Secretary would not be on board, and the Federal Reserve may not be willing to accept the $1 trillion coin. So there's still problems with it, right? I guess looking, saying, well, maybe this will happen, maybe that'll happen. But the reality is, if they think it's a good idea, they'll get it done, right? There's not really anyone that's going to stand in the way. But it's always crazy to think that the $1 trillion coin, it always comes up in the debt ceiling problems. And to see a coin that probably looks like a quarter that's worth $1 trillion is just so crazy. And another thing here about this coin and stuff says calls for the coin come as Biden aides look into whether the debt limit itself is constitutional, which, I mean, great. The government is so good with managing money. We all know that they racked up this 30 trillion debt randomly. It wasn't their fault. They're so good with managing money. We can look at the debt clock, right? So this is obviously a bunch of the debt and stuff, different stats for the US. And you can see national debt over $31 trillion, even though they take in $4.6 trillion in revenue, they spend $6 trillion. So you can see the problem there. When you spend more than you take in, that's a problem. When you do that consistently every single year, year in and year out for decades, it compounds as a big problem. So instead of addressing the problem, let's just make a $1 trillion coin, or just lift the debt limit. We don't need a debt limit. We should be racking up debts. There's no reason this should be 30 trillion. Make it 100 trillion, 200 trillion. Just keep racking it up. I mean, after all, we look down here, you have unfunded liabilities of $187 trillion. So that money's gonna have to come from somewhere. And if the debt limit is in place, then you're not gonna be able to just print it out of thin air, borrow it into oblivion, even though that's going to end up happening, right? They're going to print the money, they're going to need it, and there's going to be pretty big problems with that. But none of the numbers look good. Obviously, the government, not the greatest people in managing money. Who would have expected that? And you can see it's a consistent thing, because even if you can look back in time, if we go back to 1980, it's the exact same story. We could see is the national debt things. They have still big debt, $881 billion in debt, and they're still spending more than they're taking in. So the problem has been here for a long time. It's not like this is a new problem that's only been going on for the last couple of years or couple of decades. Even since 1980, you can see that they've been spending more than they've been taking in, and you see how the effects compound and get worse over time. They were spending more. They had $46 billion that they were spending over their budget. Now they spend like almost $2 trillion more than what they take in. So it just continues to get worse. And if we go into the future, 2027, based on these numbers, you can see it's just continuously getting worse. Almost $43 trillion, over $2 trillion deficit, even though it's almost $7.5 trillion in tax revenue. So this much money they're making right now, if they kept things the same, so 7.4 trillion, if we look at today, it's 6 trillion in spending. So if spending stayed the same till 2027, it would be fine. There'd be no real issues. There wouldn't be a problem with the debt ceiling, because you maybe should be paying down the debt or having extra money instead of spending a ton more. But that's just not what the numbers say. Is they're going to continuously spend as much as humanly possible, which is why this $1 trillion coin comes into effect. It's a very easy thing to do, to just print this coin and say, wow, look at that, we solved all the problems, instead of actually addressing the problems, because as we know, that is the go-to strategy all the time, is kick the can down the road. Don't address anything now, it doesn't matter. And just when you get down the road to the can again, just kick it again, who cares? That's gonna do it for this video. As always, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video.